Thank you, Last Ceann Comhairle. There's been a whole variety of issues raised here within this debate, from the taxation of REITs and IRAs to the issue raised there by Senator McDougall in relation to taxes and capital. I want to say a word about each of the points that I've heard. I'm going to begin with the point that Senator McDowell made there regarding the level of transactions that we have within our economy is influenced by the level of tax with regard to those transactions in the first place, a point that I would agree with. That is my opening point in relation to where we stand with our housing market at the moment. I absolutely appreciate, and I keep on saying this every time we get into any debate in relation to housing, the stress that is caused by many in relation to what is happening with their rents, the worry that so many have about their future, who are worried will they ever be able to buy their own home, and the insecurity that is being caused for many in our society who, despite their best efforts, worry that they will not be able to afford their rent in the future or have a roof over their home, a roof over their heads that they're paying their own mortgage on. And in any issue that is so complex and causing such a deep worry at the moment, unfortunately, the answers that we are putting forward at the moment are ones that I believe will make a difference over time. But people want a very quick response and want homes to be built immediately and want easy answers that are capable of delivering quick solutions. And I understand why they want that, given the level of concern that is there at the moment. And this brings me on to the issue in relation to REITs and IRAs and the role they play. Looking at the role of REITs and IRAs, you have to, I contend to Shannon here this evening, look at their role in the context of the role the state is already playing. The largest builder of homes in our country at the moment is the state. We have this year €4.1 billion being invested in the direct building or supporting the delivery of more homes within our country. And I'm going to keep on saying this again and again in this debate because I keep on hearing the assertion that we have a housing policy that is led by the market. We have a housing policy within which the market plays a role. They're two fundamentally different things. We have planning regulation, we have the Land Development Agency, we have local authorities in particular that have not had more active building programmes now for many years than they do at the moment. And the examples of this are literally concrete. Go up Dominic Street, Las Ceann, see what is being built by Dublin City Council. See the quality of the accommodation that is being built and watch people who've been waiting for a home for too long, which I accept, now move into accommodation and into apartments that actually are of an extraordinary quality, because they should be. Because as a rich country, which we are, with the income growth and the national income growth that we've had in recent years, we should be in a position that we can build local authority accommodation of that kind of quality. But it is being built. We will have tenants moving into it soon. Sean Foster House. Senator, just down the road from King's Inn. Look at that accommodation that's been built at the moment, which will be open now in March. State-of-the-art accommodation being built by Dublin City Council. Examples of which now are being replicated all over our country by local authorities all over our country who, after many years of difficulty due to the aftermath of our last crisis, have had the levels of funding now in recent years which is bearing fruit and bearing dividends in new homes that are being built. That is relevant to the discussion that we are about to have now on REITs and IRAs. Because if we want to make the kind of progress year on year in housing that we have to make, we need more supply. We need more homes to be built. And it's an increasingly unfashionable argument to make, both here in this Shannon and elsewhere, that the private sector does have a role to build in the delivery of those homes. But it does. This state, this government, cannot build every home that every citizen wants at every price level they want in our country at the moment. The private sector has a role to play in that. And if we want more homes to be built, which I do, and I believe this House does, there is a role for the private sector in doing that. And that simple argument leads on to a complex point then, which is what is the role of REITs and IRAs? And to those who don't want them to play a role in our country, and there are an increasing number, I would ask them to consider a question. And that question is, do we want the savings of other parts of the world to play a role in the provision of homes in our country? Do we want pensions that are being built up in other parts of Europe and other parts of the world to play a role in the delivery of homes in our country? Do we want those who have saved money elsewhere to play a role in building more homes and in particular more apartments? And I believe the answer to that question is yes. And why? The reason why is we are a small economy. We have 2 banks that have left our country. We have 2 banks of scale, a 3rd bank that is trying to build up scale. We have a young and growing population. We need billions of euro of additional investment from the private sector every year, on top of the billions of euro that the Irish state is building in delivering more homes. They are, as I said, complex and increasingly unfashionable arguments to make, but we can't wish away that reality. If we want more homes to be built in our country, there is a role for private capital in doing that. And by private capital, I mean savings that we make, or savings that others make in other parts of the world who are looking to see can those savings be used in a productive way. If we as a country decide we don't want that capital, and that is the argument that has been put forward by Sinn Féin, because be under no illusion, if we make a decision that we're going to change the taxation structure of REITs and IRAs, and again, I understand why that is an attractive argument, that is investment that simply won't come to Ireland. It's savings that will be used elsewhere. And I believe that those savings have a role to play in the provision in particular of particular kinds of apartments within our country, particularly within our city, which in turn will have a really important effect of increasing overall supply and allowing existing housing stock to be used in a different way. That argument may be one that will take time to have an effect, but ultimately I believe it is part of the answer to what is a very difficult and very, very complex set of dilemmas that we face in housing at the moment. The argument that is then made, and we heard it again from Senator Gavin this evening, is that REITs don't pay any capital gains tax. And of course, he is partially correct in what he has said there, which is very typical of the arguments that Sinn Féin are making at the moment on many areas of public policy. Yes, it is the case that capital gains tax is not paid inside a REIT when a gain is made. But of course, where the tax is paid is when the income is distributed from that REIT or that IRAF, which is exactly the same way we tax pensions. We don't tax the gain that is made within a pension. You tax the gain when the income is distributed from a pension. So for the record this evening, I want to just state again to the Senate that if you are a REIT, for example, when income is distributed from that REIT, we have a dividend withholding tax that is paid on that distributed income of 25%. If you're an Irish investor, when you receive that income, you then have to pay tax, either if you're an individual, a personal tax rate. If you're a company, you'll pay corporate tax in relation to it. If you're an international investor in an Irish REIT, you'll then pay tax on the income that you receive from that REIT, according to the tax that you pay in your own jurisdiction. So tax is paid, but tax is paid when the income is distributed. If you're an IRAF, there's also a withholding tax in place in relation to that, and that's at 20%. And that's where the tax is paid. And then again, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, that is where you'll then pay maybe even additional tax on top of that. And these, senators, I know, are complex arguments in the face of arguments that say, well, REITs and IRAs should pay more tax or don't pay any tax at all, as some would assert. But that is where the tax is paid. And at the heart of all of this complexity, and at the heart of all of this technical language regarding withholding taxes, taxable events, what's a REIT, what's an IRAF, is a simple point. And that simple point is, do we want private capital to play a role alongside an active state in more homes being built in Ireland? And I'm making the case to the Seanad here this evening that the answer to that question is yes. And why? Why? Because we are a small open economy with a limited level of capital ourselves, with a young and growing population. And we need more homes to build that need, to meet that need. And within that, the private sector has a role to play. That's not the same as saying that our housing policies led by the private sector, or indeed that our housing policy equals the private sector. And for those who make the claim that that is what we are doing here in this government, walk up Dominic Street, look at Sean Foster House, look at what is happening at the moment, walk down Sean McDermott Street, at the heart of my constituency, look at Mary's Mansions. And I hear again the condemnation from the opposition here regarding the role, for example, that approved housing bodies can play, the role that leasing can play in the work that local authorities can do. Look at the extraordinary renovation that has happened in Mary's Mansions in the heart of Sean McDermott Street, a local authority accommodation that was, yes, run by Dublin City Council, is now looked after by an approved housing body. But bring that argument to the tenants who are now living in that accommodation and living in those apartments in a quality of accommodation that they deserve, that is far better than what they had a few years ago, and they deserve far better, but it is a reality that has now happened for them. So I make these arguments because there are consequences to the debate that we're having. If we increasingly indicate as a country that we don't want or are unwilling to see a role for private capital investment in either the provision of homes or the provision of jobs in our country, that will have consequences. But that is an argument that I'm going to engage in, and I'm going to make the case here for the role of that kind of private capital investment supported by a state that's never invested more in housing, that is determined to make a difference. In relation to the argument that is put forward there by Senator McDougall, and I do have to choose my own words carefully in relation to this, because if there's any area of taxation in which my words are scrutinised, it's regard to taxes in relation to capital and capital transactions. So just to remind the House here this evening that we do have a finance bill that is not making any significant changes in the levels of taxation and capital transactions in our country. The one point I'll make to Senator McDougall in relation to the argument that he's brought forward, and I've said at the start of my statement here this evening, that I do believe there is a role between the tax you have in a transaction and the number of transactions that occur. But we are in an economy at the moment, Senator, that for extraordinary reasons is now at the level, is now experiencing so many capacity constraints and is already experiencing so many shortages in relation to whether it be people to do work or the kind of capacity that an economy needs to ensure that if a transaction happens, it can be executed at normal and affordable prices. And I do think there's an economic cycle to your argument that does bear consideration, to ask the point that are we at the right point in our economy that changes in the level of taxation on transactions would have the kind of effect that it did a number of years ago when the last big change was made. We are in an environment now in which rising prices and inflation is an increasingly important issue for us as we form economic policy for next year and beyond. And I think there's an economic cycle dimension to your argument that I know you'd understand, that I think is relevant to the argument that you're putting forward. Las Count Corla, for those reasons, I'm not accepting the amendments that are being put forward. The substantive amendments that have been put forward here are in relation to the role of REITs and IRAs. And the core contention I'm making to the Seanad here this evening is we have an active state. It's never spent more on that which we must spend more on, which is how we deliver affordable homes. But there is a role for the private sector in delivering homes. And what REITs and IRAs do is say to the rest of the world that we want your savings to play a role in increasing housing supply in Ireland. It's a difficult argument to make at the moment, but not making that argument and potentially even losing it, to my mind, is a recipe for fewer homes being built in Ireland in the future, or asking the state to do even more. And that itself is something that we're willing to do by the level of capital investment that we now have in our country at the moment. But no state can do everything when it comes to meeting the level of housing need that we have. Thank you.